It's a real pleasure to be able to share with you with this subject. It's studying the Bible from the Middle East perspective. And of course, because of time, we'll be a bit short, but I hope you'll find it helpful. There are certain things as a Middle Eastern person I'm looking for when I'm reading the Bible, and it's kind of because of I live in the same culture, it's easy for me to pick up those things. The Bible is not a Western book. It wasn't written by Westerners or to Westerners. It's totally been developed in the Middle East. So it's important to understand the Middle East mindset to fully understand what the Bible tells us. I developed two approaches. There are 7 keys which will help you to understand better. And these 7 keys are within 2 groups or 2 approaches. First is, I call it zoom out approach. And second, it's a zoom in approach. What is zoom out approach? Zoom out approach is looking to the Bible, looking to the culture of Bible from the wider perspective. Look at the way it's unique in his culture, in the way of representing stories and information, people, everything in it. First important thing is to understand that all Middle East nations, they have this grand narrative thing. It's a big history, the history of their nation, the history of origin, history of developing their ethnic and national identity, and history of their hope. And all the nations in Middle East, particularly Jewish people as well, who happen to read the Bible, have this grand narrative. So this grand narrative is in the Bible, and it answers the questions like every person who grows in an ethnic community, in ethnic social entity would ask who we are and where are we coming from, why we are so different from the rest of the world, where we fitting as an ethnic group in this variety of family of ethnic groups around us, and what's our hopes for future, where are we heading. So the grand narratives is a story who gives answer to these questions. So it combines 2 important things. It's genealogy. It's a line of people who been part of this ethnic group, and sagas. It's a stories of heroes, and these stories of heroes gives us answer to question who are our models of behavior, models of values as ethnic group we carry, and we see it kind of condensed in these heroic stories. So the Bible, basically, this history, part of history of the Bible, has these 2 things in this grand narrative. It's genealogy, the answer of origins, how everything started, or particularly for Jewish nation. And we have to remember that Moses, or then Samuel, and then Ezra, and others who were writing, adding, and editing the story, the grand narrative story, they had this in their mind to keep their national ethnic identity and pass it on to the next generation. So all the stories and details and people, sub-stories, everything is for that particular purpose. And of course, part of ethnic identity is also the part of it's a religious identity, and why we worship this great I am, or Yahweh God, rather than others, should be explained and kept as a part of identity. Another thing is to understand within the grand narrative. Grand narrative combined by smaller narratives, smaller stories, and they have different size. And the size is important. if the size of story or sub-story is big, then the character, the personage, the meaning, the moral or spiritual meaning of the story is important. If the story is short, then the meaning is short. The weight it carries is short. Another thing to understand about the grand narrative, that the grand narrative and sub-stories combined in dualistic way. The structure and personage are dualistic. Like everything is in twos, in duals, heaven and earth, light and darkness, tree of life and tree of death, male and female, Cain and Abel, they're always two. And particularly in Cain and Abel, it's obvious that one is kind of opposed to another. One is always good character, another is bad character. Isaac, Ishmael, Jacob, Esau, Moses, Pharaoh, Abraham, Nimrod, Peter and Judah. There are two dualistic, these two characters always combined in personage. Structure of story itself, sub-stories or stories, they always have this dualistic way of ups and downs. Always story goes up, something good things happens, and then goes down, something bad thing happens, and then again, something good things happen, and then bad things happen again. So if you read the Bible and you find in the stories, in sub-stories, two good stories in a row, it might be you're missing something, some bad story, some negative thing happened in between, and you just missed it. The second thing in zoom out perspective or approach is important, that we have to understand that for Middle East people, social group is more important than individual. The personal achievements are good, but if they are good if they're only serving to the needs of community, like Joseph, story of Joseph. He became a big guy in Egypt, but in the end of the story, as he understood, and the rest of guys understood, and we understand, that was serving for the benefit of his own people, on his own family. Another story from New Testament, from the Gospels. It's a great story when Peter walked on a sea like Jesus walked. And have you noted that wherever Jesus have seen any fate, he always praised, but in these situations, never. Instead, he reproved Peter. That every preacher almost once preached about how great faith Peter had and brought it kind of as an example. But not in the story. Actually, all those who are preaching Peter as a good example of faith, they failed because it's not about that. It's about how arrogant was Peter, leaving his fearful, scared brothers and friends in a boat and just want to be out of boat, leaving them without carrying them. And the story ends when Jesus took him back to the boat where he had to belong with his friends, because Jesus doesn't need his big faith on a sea. He needs his big faith in a boat with his fearful brothers and friends. And the story ends with everyone, those in the boat, worshiping him and saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." And no word about Peter. It wasn't, "Truly you are the Son of God, and Peter, you're the next best faith man." Well, third thing to watch in a zoom out perspective, it's an honor and shame. The Middle East cultures are shame-based culture. The most important thing for community life is shaming or honoring. There's a good teaching about this given by our brother Andy McCulloch, so please follow that. But I just want to mention one example of that. When in Mark chapter 5, Mark tells a story about Jairus, a ruler of synagogue, who came to Jesus and asked that he could go and heal his daughter. And she was 12 years old, and now she was ill and just about to die. So he asked Jesus to come, and Jesus went with him. And within that story of Jesus healing Jairus' daughter, another sub-story emerges, almost in every gospel. A woman who had bleeding for 12 years approached secretly to Jesus and touched to his garment and will get healed. You know the story. And what's important in this story, that the way Jesus approaches to this lady, first of all, he stays, steers, finds the person who approached to him. And when this lady, she found out that she can't be hidden, so she came up. What Jesus said to her? Jesus said, "Daughter, your faith made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." It's not just about great faith this lady had. This woman was acting upon the shame, not upon the faith or upon the law. According to the law, she wouldn't touch anybody else. But what impressed Jesus, or rather amazed Jesus, and Mark emphasizing in this story, no man brought this woman to Jesus. Like Jairus represent her daughter, he shamed himself, kneeling down before Jesus for her daughter. But 12 years he never thought about this lady. She been part of their community, and as a ruler of synagogue, he had to take care of her. He had to know her. He had to bring this lady to Jesus as he brought the issue of her daughter. And in fact, Jesus naming the lady with the same word, with Jairus calling her daughter. This in Greek it's tiratsir. And he came to Jesus said, "My tiratsir is sick." And Jesus calling to this lady now, "Tiratsir, your faith is well, go in peace and be healed." Exactly same words what Jairus was asking Jesus for, her daughter, come and that she may be well. And now Jesus telling this woman, "Your faith made you well, daughter." He's kind of shaming Jairus, who put to shame this lady, not caring about her, because she was despised, rejected, uncovered. No man was representing her. And now Jesus is covering her, representing her in front of other men, other people. That will be zoom out approach, understanding great narrative, personage issues, structure of story, social group, honor and shame. Now let's go to the zoom in approach with several things, keys we have to see into the text. If zoom out, we understand the culture behind. Now in zoom in, we look to the text to see key things. Several things. Numbers are important. In Middle East cultures, numbers are rounded all the time. People like to round numbers up or down. So wherever numbers is given, they're important. Like in the same story, 12 years of the suffering of this lady, and the girl was 12 years old, of Jairus' daughter. So these 12 connecting together. 12 years, one was suffering, another was enjoying her daughter. So it's with these numbers, Mark is connecting two stories together. Names are important. In the Middle East, everyone would ask you, if you represent yourself and tell what's your name, they would say, what that means, what your name means. Because for Middle East mind, names mean something, and it's important what they mean. And we see God always giving the name to people or changing the names. For instance, he doesn't say to Abraham, "Okay, guy, you have now son, name them the way you want." He always names people he's choosing. Jesus was changing the name of these disciples. It's important to understand what that name means. So if any time you find a name, translated or not translated, go dig and find out what that name means. And there is a meaning behind that. It's connected to the story, connected to the issue it brought. For instance, in the story of Abraham, when he had his son, first son, Ishmael, God told that name, call him Ishmael, which means God hears. And then he called another son from Sarah, Isaac, which means loves. He loves or loves. Can you imagine when somebody will ask Abraham, do you have sons? Yes, two. What are their names? Ishmael and Isaac. It sounds just names for us, but for a Middle East person, understanding the meaning, it would sound, what's the name of your sons? Well, God hears and he loves. What kind of names they are? My sons are God hears and he loves. God hears and he loves. That's the power of the name, because people said, what that means? Why you had that names for your sons? And that would reveal the purpose behind that. Another thing is to look, its way of addressing or approach is important. Sometimes question will be important to understand why this question is given. In a plain sense, question means something, but actually it might have a different meaning, not just what it's about. For instance, in Genesis 18, when angels asked Abram sitting at his tent, where's your wife Sarah? It wasn't just about being polite about his wife, but actually it was hint that his wife failed to do what she had to do as a good housewife. She had to receive guests, she had to serve them, but instead she stayed at her tent, and poor Abraham was running and acting as a wife, as a servant. So that question is hint to understand the approach. Another thing to watch, to see in another thing to see in a text, it might be the words being sarcastic or irony. They carry some sense of irony. There's a lot of emotions in the text of the Bible, because Middle East people are very emotional people. So irony and sarcasm is always part of the emotions. For instance, Genesis 21:12, when Sarah asked Abram to get rid of the servant woman with the son, and it said that it was hard for Abram. And God said to him, whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice. That was irony. To tell Middle East men that listen to your wife, it was an irony. It was a slap to the face. But God was hinting, referring, when Abraham had heard the voice of his wife in the first place in Genesis 16, and went to Hagar to have Ishmael. Another was, let's say, from New Testament, Mark 4:38, when they went into the storm with disciples, you know the story, and Jesus was sleeping, and they came and they woke him up and said, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And that this calling him teacher, it wasn't really out of respect. Because we love Jesus and we think these disciples loved him too. Actually not. I mean, they love him, but not the way we love now. We understand him as a master and Lord. It's the first time they're calling him a teacher, and calling him in the middle of the storm. Why? Because he was teaching all day long on the shore, and now he forced them actually to go into the sea in the evening when the weather is changing, is the most dangerous time. And he forced them to go in that time. So they kind of referring to him, hey teacher, you are teaching all day long and we get into trouble because of you. And you are not caring about this. So it was irony, not just respect. It's the way the Middle East person would read it. Another thing to watch, the last thing I would share with you, it's honor or dishonoring. If the name of person is in the story, it gives him an honor. So when, let's say, in a story of rich man and poor Lazarus, in the story, Jesus names the Lazarus, he immediately gives him an honor, and immediately he dishonor the rich man without naming him. Or when in Luke 15, in a parable, we all know the parable of a prodigal son, when the prodigal son 5 times, or young son actually, 5 times calls his father as a father. Father, my father has this, my father. He always called him father. When he came back, he said, Father, I sinned. He always called him as a father and honors him. But the oldest son, he never calls him father. He even just talks to him without naming him, said, all this year just worked for you. He wasn't honoring. And then we see how father calls them. Father says about his younger son, he said, my son, Heos, is back, and that Greek word means truly son. But when he speaks to the oldest son, he used different word, teknon, which means just young man, kind of, not personal son. It's kind of showing that you're not acting as my own son. So the way people giving honor or taking honor in the text shows how they're really approaching to the person. So I hope it was helpful. God bless you. Have a good time.